Hi, I'm Steve Saylor, I'm blind, and if you're wondering how I'm able to play video games if I'm blind, if you take a look at the video here, and if it's not there, click the link in the description down below to see exactly what I see when I'm playing video games. Today I'm going to be taking a look at EA's Star Wars Squadrons and give my accessibility impressions of the game. So let's just jump right in and see whether or not actually I'm going to be a good Imperial or Rebel pilot. I'm probably going to think not. So to start off, the TLDR or the TLDW, too long didn't watch, of this is that the accessibility options in this game is kind of a mixed bag, but it's probably the most fun I had struggling with my own disability than I've had in pretty much any other game. And I'm wondering still if that's because of the Star Wars franchise or just the gameplay elements themselves are pretty fun. But I actually am excited to want to be able to jump in and keep playing the story. The multiplayer is probably something that I'm going to avoid, like I would want to avoid Jabba the Hutt, otherwise, you know. But to kind of start off with, there are some things that actually I kind of found were really interesting, and we'll start off actually with the very beginning of the game when you first boot it up, is that it takes you to an accessibility menu. Now, I did see actually on social that people were really excited to be able to see this at the beginning of the game, and I will say yes, I'm excited as well. Squadrons isn't the first game to really have an accessibility options menu at the very beginning of the game, but I think because a lot of people are recognizing accessibility options and realizing what accessibility can do in a game, I think it's just people are definitely very excited to be able to see that menu at the very beginning. And they actually have some pretty interesting sort of options that are in there. One of which is actually the narration to accessibility menu, which is something that we haven't really seen actually in a lot of games, where it actually will do a narration voiceover that sort of tells you how to be able to get to the accessibility menu.
Narrate path to accessibility. Press the R1 button twice for options. Press cross button for accessibility options.
The fact that actually those lines are voiceover instead of a text-to-speech narrator voice is actually really cool. It's something that I've actually wanted for a long time for narration instead of using a text-to-speach. I would love to be able to hear voiceover from either some of the actors that are in this game or of the main character, if the context allows it, because I love when it's sort of a game adds you into the immersion of it, including within its accessibility options. And I love to be able to see more of that. I know how expensive voiceover is, so to see that in this is great. However, there is definitely a lot of problems with the narration voiceover. Unfortunately, pretty much almost everything else is not narrated, or even there is even a text-to-speech option. The majority, I'd say like 90% of the menus are not narrated at all, including even the accessibility menu at the beginning of the game, which is kind of sad because it's sort of, the narration is meant for blind players or visually impaired players to be able to get to, but when you don't have a menu that is even narrated for those players once they get to that menu, it really kind of makes it extremely difficult for those players to actually find the settings that they need without sighted assistance. Now, I'm not saying that this game is great for blind players, and actually I will probably say it's a little bit far from it without having sighted assistance. It does work for some visually impaired players like myself, but it definitely does not fill the spectrum for blind players as a whole. Now, before we get into the actual gameplay itself, there are other options that I actually wanted to be able to touch on. You have full remapping of pretty much every single control. And you can get really nitty gritty with some of these controls, especially on a mouse and keyboard setting, or even if you have like an actual throttle and joystick, like as a hardware component controller. There's definitely a lot in there to be able to remap and try to be able to customize it to your own sort of play style or ability, and it's really cool. And just in general as well, there actually is kind of a nice sort of balance between simulation and basic sort of arcade style gameplay. There is a lot of customization once you kind of get into the simulation aspect for it. So if you really want to feel like that you're flying a TIE fighter or an X-Wing, you can definitely do that and really customize that experience to make it really feel like an actual Rebel or Imperial pilot. But then for those who sort of want a more fun kind of arcade style experience, there are those basic options that will still make it fun to play, even with just a regular controller. But you don't have to really worry about every single movement or wrong button press if you mess up. Another thing that's great is that you can adjust your difficulty options, and there's multiple options to be able to choose from, and you can be able to adjust at any time throughout the game, including you can be able to go and jump back into missions once you've played in the story mode, and you can actually be able to adjust which difficulty setting you want to be able to set at. Now, as far as audio, and for those who are deaf and hard of hearing, there is some pretty good options in there. There are subtitle settings. You can adjust the subtitle size, background. It has speaker tags. It even has some of the NPC announcer dialogue that you'll hear in some of the hangars that you kind of jump into, which is really cool. So it kind of has like full captions in that. There's even a lot of like visualization of sound throughout the entire gameplay, where even if you are looking away in your cockpit and you hear someone, one of your crewmates actually speaking, there is like a little like audio wave icon that will point in the direction of where that pilot is, so you can actually be able to kind of fly towards it and kind of see exactly where they are. But there's also subtitles for those as well. Pretty much there's a lot actually in here for a deaf and hard of hearing. It's not perfect. I would say if you want a more in-depth look, go to caniplaythat.com and read Ben Bayless's review of this. He gives it a 6.7 out of 10 for deaf and hard of hearing. Now, as far as the actual gameplay itself, this one was tough. I think probably my biggest problem as a visually impaired player is really the tunnel vision you get when you're in the cockpit. There is no capability to be able to kind of go outside of the cockpit and sort of have a third-person view or a HUD-less sort of mode where you can actually be able to see everything that's around you, because they actually rely mostly on kind of the realistic simulation of the controls and certain dials and switches that give you visual feedback of what sort of things you're doing within the ship itself, like being able to increase shields or engines or more power to the lasers or how fast you're going. And it's kind of a cool immersion aspect of it. But when a lot of that is in the cockpit and you're already in tunnel mode, it is really difficult to be able to see anything around you. I haven't played this in VR, so I don't know whether or not this will work 100%, where you can be able to kind of look up and down and see everything that's around you. There are definitely some things in here that would be difficult to see even if I was in a VR setting. I think probably the biggest sort of tunnel vision type cockpit that I jumped into that was very difficult was probably the TIE Fighter. There is such a focus on the center of the screen where there's so much in the way that it is really difficult for me to be able to find my target, even with the ability to be able to lock on to targets by a click of either the left trigger button or the X button to kind of cycle through targets. It's just really difficult to fly around and see exactly where you're going to. Actually, I had more luck with the Rebel side when you're jumping into an X-Wing or an A-Wing, which is the two ships that I tried. Because the canopy is actually much bigger, so I can be able to see a lot more of what's around me than if I was in the TIE Fighter. So that's probably my biggest complaint with it, is that literally is just depending on which ship you're in is going to be difficult or not difficult to be able to fly around. Now, as far as flying, that is probably the steepest learning curve that I had with it, because I'm so used to be able to using the left and right thumbstick to be able to look around and kind of determine how fast I'm going and stuff like that. But in reality, I had to sort of switch my thinking in that mostly my right thumbstick is to be able to kind of look around, and the left thumbstick is just literally the throttle. And it took a while for me to be able to get used to, especially in that training mission where essentially I'm just constantly pushing forward on the throttle, but like it took me a while to realize, oh no, that's just basically just putting my speed at maximum. And I'm like, why can't I turn that quickly? And I realized, oh right, I have to sort of throttle back in order to be able to even like make the more precise turns. So it took me a little bit to get used to that, and it probably took about 2 or 3 missions to finally get that aspect. So if you are not really super great, or you have a disability that kind of would limit that aspect to it, just prepare for a bit of a learning curve in trying to be able to get that to work for you. Another big problem I had was trying to be able to find the targets that I'm supposed to be hitting. Yes, there are buttons to kind of like auto sort of lock onto a target. The game does a pretty good job of being able to let me know where that ship is that I'm targeting, including when it sort of dips below my canopy or dips below my field of view. And I have to, and it comes up with like a little square box for me to be able to see, okay, that is the direction of where I need to sort of move my ship towards. But when a ship is a little bit further off in the distance and all I really see is just a bounding box, I can never really determine how far I need to be in order to be able to start shooting. There are many times where I would shoot because I think I'm shooting in the right direction, but there would be a little prompt that says I'm out of range, and I've basically wasted energy on those lasers or missiles because I'm just shooting at something that is way too far off in the distance. Another trouble I had was flying around pretty much anything that wasn't open space or any other ships are flying around me, because I kept bumping into everything. It was so bad, and unfortunately I don't have any video footage of this. I am such a bad pilot that at one point I'm flying like pretty much right beside a Star Destroyer, and I'm trying to be able to kind of like make sure I don't crash into it, but then I accidentally crash in. Now in the game you can be able to, like, you don't explode if you crash, you basically just kind of bounce off an object. But in this one I kind of like went at such an angle and such a speed that I legit got stuck in a Star Destroyer, and like it actually kind of like I couldn't move at all. I basically broke the game, and I had to restart from that checkpoint in order to be able to, for me to move forward. So it's really difficult for me to be able to like fly around, especially when you're like all of a sudden like you find yourself upside down and you're like, wait, why is that Star Destroyer looking like that? And then you have to kind of reorient yourself. And like I could definitely see some people getting very seasick when you're or like space sick if you're playing around this in VR, because there was times I actually kind of felt like, whoa, wait, what am I doing? There was even one mission, or near the very beginning, where essentially you have to try to be able to destroy these Imperial shuttles, and they're flying into these kind of like this sort of ship debris, into these kind of like little tunnels that it's sort of made within the debris, and it's actually kind of using it to be able to hide its approach to try to be able to take out one of your big sort of ships. And you're kind of tempted to sort of fly into it and try to be able to get into a dogfight with the Imperial shuttle, but I essentially was like, I tried that a few times. I kept crashing so much. I felt like I was in a washing machine, just kind of spinning around, hitting almost everything in between. So I basically just was like, when I saw the shuttle just kind of go through it, I'm like, nah, I'm waiting till you're out, buddy. And then I start shooting. Now, there are some good aspects of the gameplay. Honestly, it legit is actually a lot of fun. I don't know whether, like I said before, whether it's the Star Wars franchise that I just love, but it really, really dives deep into the lore, kind of creates some cool contrast between the Imperial side and the Rebel side. And I was worried that I was going to like one more than the other, but in a way I kind of like both, regardless of sort of the difficulties I had in being a Imperial pilot as opposed to a Rebel pilot. Unfortunately, though, from what I've been told, that the single-player campaign is roughly about 7 to 10 hours long, and the majority of the rest of the gameplay is in the multiplayer aspect, and which is something that I wish I can be able to jump into. I was really excited to kind of see how fleet missions would go. I just know my limitations, and I know my own disability, that unfortunately I will not be able to jump into the multiplayer. That's just, and I feel sad about that, because I want to be able to give you my full impressions of the game itself from single player to multiplayer, but I just know my disability well enough that I will not be able to either A, carry my own weight, and B, I would get so frustrated trying to be able to get through either a dogfight or a fleet mission without dying a lot, and that's something that I know can be a detrimental factor when being able to play in those modes. I would love to be able to kind of jump in with some friends, or have this sort of a private server where I can be able to do those things, but where they can, at least the people that I know can be okay with if I'm not that super great at it. But for right now, matchmaking is just something that I'm going to have to just say no to. So I apologize I'm not able to get into the multiplayer aspect, but like I said, I know my own disability, I know my own barriers, and I don't want to get frustrated with trying to be able to play something that I just know I'm not going to be able to enjoy and play. So in conclusion, the accessibility in this game While there are some pretty interesting stuff in there, and it does work for different aspects of the spectrum for different disabilities, unfortunately, it just misses a lot of kind of areas where it would have done really well in, or at least they started to be able to kind of do really well in, and then they just kind of stopped, in case in point, the narration aspect. So I think it's probably going to be difficult for those who are blind or low vision to be able to jump into this game and enjoy. Deaf and hard of hearing players might actually have a somewhat decent time playing this. Including the aspect in the multiplayer, there is a sort of speech to text aspect for the chat, which is great if you're in a matchmaking scenario. And for motor disabilities, even though it has full customization for remapping of controls, it can be difficult because it uses pretty much a majority of the buttons that are on a controller. That would be really difficult to kind of like remap to makes it feel more comfortable. Mouse and keyboard probably be a much better scenario for those with motor disabilities. If you have the capability to be able to play it on PC, I would recommend trying that and seeing what control scheme works best for you. So that's it. If you have any questions or comments or certain things that in the game that you actually liked that you thought I missed, please leave a comment down below or hit me up on Twitter at Steve Saylor. And like I said, make sure to check out Ben Bayless's Deaf and Hard of Hearing review for Star Wars Squadrons on caniplaythat.com. And for any other future coverage, make sure you're subscribed to this channel at youtube.com/snowball. Hit that subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when new videos come out, make sure you hit the bell notification icon as well. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video. As always, I remain obediently yours. Bye.